Hello, welcome to Steelfur Speaks. I'm Steelfur. Today we're listening to an interview with James White. With James White, Brian Gottlieb, and Chris Gehring from LSS, who are on the Instant Speed podcast. I'm sure Flake did a really good job of introducing and interviewing these guys, but I always like to dive a little deeper into analysis than some of my other content creators, so I'm going to have a look at what they said, and I'm going to break it down a bit further and see if there are any big unanswered questions that are still pending that I think the community might want to know about. So there we go. I haven't watched this, so this is like an instant reaction, so let's just dive in.
Proudly showcase Flesh and Blood, Pokemon, Magic, Weiss, and One Piece, a gateway into an exhilarating universe of gaming. Immerse yourselves in our diverse products. I've
no idea where FABTCG is, but shout out to them. It's good that they're sponsoring this podcast, and I hope anyone in their local community makes their way down there and has a good time. Is it maybe in Canada? Canada? Okay, yeah.
Come alive and unforgettable moments are forged. Come join us at FABTCG.
I am back from Barcelona, and I wanted to...
It's probably in Canada. I thought it was in Canada before because I knew Flake was maybe from Canada, and now I'm saying it's almost definitely in Canada because we got Montreal up here, so yeah.
Barcelona, and there was meant to be a ISP live. There was supposed to be an episode that was going to be recorded live, which was meant to be a question and answer period for some of the people out in the audience. Now, the issue with that was that there was no audio available to sort of broadcast the on-site. So there was no there was a situation where essentially the microphone and the speaker system, which I had no agency over, it wasn't my equipment, I was not the person to deal with, there was issues with that it could not get done. So the on-site Q&A did not happen. I had James White, I had Brian Gottlieb, I had Chris Gehring ready to go to answer your questions and to have a conversation, which I was then going to record, publish, and do that.
Oh, so this was actually recorded in Barcelona, but he couldn't do any audience interaction. Okay.
But the benefit of it was meant to be that the people on site would have access to these game developers, James, Brian, and Chris. The audio might not be the champions of this. The voting ends on December 1st.
All right, very special Instant Speed podcast. I've got three, I don't know what else to call you guys other than like the heart and soul of the development team here. Who's really in charge? Let's just be real. Like, James, is it you, or is there like, are you pulling all the strings? What's the story here?
It depends of what topic or subject you want to refer to. Like, these guys are definitely in charge of some stuff. I'm in charge of other stuff as well, but
okay,
we all sort of wear our own hats. Yeah.
Delegated responsibility.
Yeah.
My impression has always been, so like Chris is very much in development. I think he's very good at coming up with new ideas and development. I think James is like the one in charge of the lore, the feeling, and like maybe the initial ideas for like different heroes and stuff. And Brian seems to be like a mechanics guy. Like, we've seen a lot more complicated fab cards start to come out since he joined the team. So it feels like Brian is bringing in like mechanics and like layers of design. James is managing the core theme, and then Chris is Chris is like doing a lot of the legwork to sort of flesh out ideas and things like that. But we'll see. We'll see what they say.
That's a good round. We play to our strengths. No, that's fair. Like, the way that I would have said it, James, is honestly, if it works, if it's successful, that's you.
But you are absolutely right. This is the senior leadership team of the product department, essentially, at Legend Story Studios. So, each set starts with a design vision, and that typically
they might also just give each one of them like a set to take the lead on, and then flow into that, because that of course is split level design, lets them work on different projects at different times in a bit more of an agile style. But they might not be fully agile, but they might have elements of that mixed in.
Comes from myself, and Brian assists me with that, particularly during the refinement. Brian assists me in that. Typically this is the senior leadership team of the product department, essentially, at Legend Story Studios. So each set starts with a design vision, and that typically comes from myself, and Brian assists me with that, particularly during the refinement part of that initial design build up. And then it passes over to Chris's team. Chris is our long-standing lead developer. and he runs the team, which is I think we're at like 12 devs, eh?
Yeah. When Brian's in the office, it's about 12.
Yeah.
So we're talking about a process where James is like, I want a gladiator arena pit fight set. And then he probably goes to Brian and he says, okay, the main mechanics are going to be X, Y, and Z, and they kind of agree those together. And then it kind of just gets, once they have that key theme of, oh, it's going to be gold focused, it's going to be deathmatch arena focused, we want, James might even say, I want this hero to come back, or I want a hero that looks or feels like that. Then those ideas kind of filter down into the 12 people who start to actually design each of the original cards. And some of those cards might come in from, higher up, but also some of those cards are just going to be designed by people thinking, what do we need? What fills this spot? What enables that mechanic? That kind of thing, which is probably more on the team side of things.
Many years now, and then Brian is kind of like the bridge between design and dev. So Brian sort of like straddles both parts of it and assists Chris in with the management of the development pipeline, but also...
And a lot of that development work as well is like, here's the idea, is it cool? Yes. Does it work in the game? Yes, no. Is it balanced? Yes, no. Is there something that's needed to make this effect work? All of those kind of questions are handled by lots of people who test ideas and talk about them and come up with concepts and things like that. So it can be a one-man job, but at the size that LSS is at now, it's very much not a one-man job. So even if the initial idea for, say, like, the codexes, for example, came from James or Brian, where they're like, well, I want a series of books that represent the 3 plagues in the pits, and they're all going to do a similar effect, which is put a card in your arsenal, and then make one of the tokens. That probably gets refined quite heavily before we end up with the actual final card, right?
Plugs back in to myself on the design side, because it's a very it's not just design finishes and then it passes over to dev and then that's it, see you later. It's a very ongoing process.
Circular is how it is. Things often work through like a wraparound type structure.
Well, Chris Gehring is somebody who maybe a lot of people are not familiar with because everybody knows James, obviously. Brian, you've made such friends on Twitter.
I try and get him to tweet more. I promise you, if he tweeted more, he would be more infamous than I am.
Really?
He's smart and he's quiet. Like being in incognito mode.
Yeah, that's a smart move. I mean, Brian's
watching though.
I have met Chris Gehring. He's a great guy. And he has interesting opinions about the game, but as he says, he's kind of like a quieter guy. Like, he doesn't like to be in the limelight as much. It takes all sorts, I think.
Silent observer, Chris, but like you mentioned, there's like a dozen other people that are part of the development team, so you can treat this 2 ways. Number one is you can pass on the praise, or the second one is you can say there's 12 other people that deserve all your ire out there for all of your criticisms. Ultimately, though, you guys do an excellent job, and I want to ask you some questions. There's something that you guys know about me is that
I don't know. I mean, these 2 are the guys at the top. These 3 are the guys at the top who make the decisions finally about what cards come out. I think the 12 people who contribute probably aren't the people who finally sign off. I have a very strong feeling that this man over here, James White, and certainly a bit of this man are the people who are finally responsible for saying yes or no to every card idea you see on your screen. Let's put it this way. I don't think Legend Story Studios has evolved to the point where James White has made a company so large that he can't be actively involved in the design of the game anymore. Like, sometimes that will happen at these companies where I was making the product and now I'm not making the product anymore, I'm running the company. LSS hasn't gotten there yet, and it might be the case that, Brian is taking the lead on one set, or, Chris is taking more of a lead running the development and doing all these things. But I very much feel that James White is still fully involved in the process. So if you have an issue with how one card was designed, I think it's going to be one of these 2 people who's responsible for that card getting approved. And maybe someone on his team came up with the card initially. But, these guys are on Twitter, so don't be afraid. I mean, we're not calling people out. We're not being mean. We're not being rude. It is just a card game. But, I know that Brian loves hearing when you have a card you don't like that he designed or you don't understand. I know he loves those tweets. I'm being a bit tongue-in-cheek here, but I know he does love those tweets. So, the next time the new Codex of Frailty comes out, just at Brian. I'm sure he'll have a lot of fun responding to you as to why you don't understand the card is balanced. That's okay.
I don't beat around the bush. There's a lot of concerns and stuff that people might have in terms of the the format, the meta, the direction of the game. James, you gave an excellent and very inspiring keynote yesterday about the future. But let's talk about the right now and how some of those problems that people might perceive and how you solve them. One of which is meta and fresh metas and how to keep those fresh. And what some might view, for example, as people who say, well, Lexi's winning so much, it's a lame duck format, it's a boring format. How do you approach that kind of, let's just call it criticism, because that's kind of what it is to a degree.
So I think that it's important to look at the time scale here, where Lexi started off 2023 as being a very admired and loved hero, and she, upon the release of Outsiders, emerged as being the best deck in the format. We saw that Pro Tour Baltimore, we saw that in the seasons that followed, and I think that she was a very liked hero, and that's certainly what we saw. Just people get sick of things if it sticks around for too long, and I think that Lexi just outlived her welcome, and that's the thing that we needed to address with the change to the Living Legion, where we needed her reign to be shorter than it eventually ended up being, right? And I think that we all still believe that Lexi was an example of what a good best deck looks like in the format. She had the best win spread across the metagame, but she wasn't winning every tournament. Like, she was making a lot of top 8s at callings and not winning the tournament. And I think that shows that there were ways to attack the metagame. Lexi certainly was the hero that had the target on her back, but there were certainly ways for high-level players to engage with the format and to succeed in the format and to ultimately beat the Lexis. But people just got fatigued.
I agree with this completely. So, Lexi was targetable. Lexi was the best deck because she had the best win rate into the most decks, but she could be targeted. And we definitely saw that when everyone showed up on Lexi, the Lexi players lost because the other players were there to counter her with other decks, and with the Dromides and the Icelanders and things like that. So I feel like everything he's saying here is absolutely correct. On the question of heroes sticking around for so long, right? But this is where we run into a bit of trouble from my perspective, and we'll see if this is addressed later on in this video, where the hero isn't the problem, the deck is the problem. And there's definitely fatigue in Fab and in any game when one deck is on the top for too long, 3, 4, 5 months, one competitive event, maybe 2 competitive events. That's enough, right? Even in Magic, you wouldn't want Jund or something like that to be the best deck for an entire year. I think the difference between traditional card games and Fab is that when a deck is the best deck in a traditional card game, some of the cards that make it the best deck rotate, and then it returns to not being the best deck. But if you were a dedicated Jund player, you could probably still find the tools to play Jund in a format, even though it wasn't the best deck. Whereas in Fab, and directly as a result of the Living Legend system, we go from fatigue, i.e. I'm tired of seeing Lexi at all these tournaments, to Lexi is no longer playable in the game. And the distinction is very large, where we go from this is the best deck to, who gets a lot of followers, who gets a lot of fans, or people who like the aesthetic, who like arrows, who like elemental, everything, all those kind of things, to you can't play with those cards anymore. And I think that's a big issue that we'll see if they address later on in the video, but it's something that I feel like one of Fab's biggest challenges is keeping those players engaged when their hero rotates out. And we're seeing it today that it's creating, Icelander was banned literally last night. And we're seeing a lot of posts today of people who are getting emotive, being like, oh, gonna miss you, my favourite deck is gone. And in some ways that moment of, I can't play my hero anymore is interesting, because it creates those emotive moments where you appreciate what you had, and you're forced to change to something new and look back on what you had fondly, and you miss what you had. And those things are emotions that are powerful and useful in a card game. But also, would it have been the worst thing if a version of Icelander remained playable where the power cards were banned and people could just play her and enjoy playing Icelander for the rest of the game? I don't know. Let's see.
Fatigued of seeing Lexi sort of always occupying between sort of 2 and 4 top 8 slots, and having to be something that you always had to be prepared for, and you always were expecting to play against multiple times throughout the tournament. And that was the fundamental issue that we needed to solve, was shortening that lifespan of a deck being at the top of the metagame.
The whole "I'm sick of this, like I'm done with it" kind of mentality. I believe that's why the current divorce rate is 50%. That sounds about right.
Yeah.
Ultimately, though,
Crazy.
you're right, and like a lot of the times it has nothing to do with balance of a hero and actual power level. It's just the frequency that people and like to a degree, like Chris, Brian, like.
I mean, I don't know if I agree with that. Like, I feel like people are getting tired of decks that are good because they keep getting beaten by them. I don't think people are so down on heroes like Rhinar or Levia, even though they are still played quite a lot. Like, Azalea, Levia, Rhinar were still played quite a lot in tournaments, even before they became better. Especially in Blitz. So I don't know. I would say fatigue is potentially tied to power. And there's partly like a correlation effect where more people play the deck because it's good, which means more people get fatigued of it. But I feel like if there was a good deck that not many people were playing, people got a lot less tired of it, even if it stuck around for a lot longer.
When you guys are designing heroes, you understand that you have to make them appealing and therefore, to a degree, strong. It's a very razor's edge that you have to design on because you don't want to make them weak and unappealing and unplayed. Therefore, there's no reason to even explore the hero, and the meta therefore stays the same. But how do you approach the thought process of, like, it's got to be good, but it also has to be fresh, but it also has to be not, people can't get sick of it. Like, it's such a very nuanced approach. Like, are you ever satisfied when you're creating a hero? Like, when is the point where you're just like, this is it. It's going to impact. People are going to like it. They're going to love it. Like, take this the way you will. How do you sleep at night? Like, I don't mean it in that regard, but like when you go to bed and you're like, all right, it is what it is. Let's go for it.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting.
I mean, just to chime in here, that a lot of sets ultimately have a hard print deadline where you're signing off on the set, even if it's not finished or even if it's not perfect, because it has to go to the printers in order to meet the deadline you've set for the set to be released. So, sometimes things get played with, and you'll know this if you followed any sort of card games or board games. Sometimes some cards get played with or cut up until, very close to the final deadline for sending the PDF to the printer. And sometimes power cards are cut at the last minute because they were too good, and heroes end up just not coming out the way that they thought they would. I mean, that's just a reality. So, it's not good or bad. It's just how the game industry has to go. We don't have digital patches that they can fix a hero after it comes out.
Several examples of heroes in our recent history that I think just nailed it. Like, absolutely hit that sweet spot where they made their presence in the metagame felt. People were excited to see them. People are still excited to see them. I really, I want to point to Outsiders as a set that I think did this extremely well.
Yeah.
Something like Azuri has been such a fantastic hero to watch. Now a calling winning hero. But like this slow burn and a few believers here, a few believers there. I really think Katsu did a really nice job after his kind of rejuvenation post Outsiders and the way he was reintroduced to the meta.
Outsiders has been one of the best sets we've had recently. It revived Azalea, though that was overshadowed by Lexi. It revived Katsu, and it brought this new hero Azuri in, who's just been steadily chipping away and getting better and more refined. So I agree with that completely.
And then I can point to Azalea as well, and I think Azalea is in the midst of a fine performance here at Worlds, either the 5th or 6th most represented deck, which go back a few years, and that's laughable.
And who was after that?
I should say I was laughing at the idea that she would be good. I've been saying since the start that arrows are just janky and you pay too much to use them, and Azalea was just too janky to work. And I maintain that they've had to do exactly what I predicted they would do 2 years ago, which is just print her a load of cards that make her much, much better and basically act as a crutch for her hero ability not being particularly good. But they have done that, and she is good now. So, here we are.
Azalea is Katsu in terms of representation, and you're right. So it's a tough beat, and again, I don't want to take too much of your time. We got a lot to get through here. Next bit here is a buzzword that a lot of people talk about, which is, I say buzzword, it's a style of play. It's what we would call control within the Flesh and Blood game, fatigue. This has always been a problem, and it's sort of re-arisen in the Bright Lights Limited format that this was the way to play it, which kind of...
it was also incredibly prevalent in the Outsiders Limited format as well, where, the heroes with the daggers, i.e. the the warrior, the ninjas, and the assassins were the overall best heroes in limited and to an extent draft as well, because ultimately when Azalea got into trouble, she could keep shooting if she couldn't get a good dominated arrow off. It's not to say it wasn't good. Outsiders was a very good balanced draft format, but to say that fatigue is a bright lights problem is not, to underplay its impact on other limited formats as well. Fatigue Ultim in Tales of Aria, fatigue in sort of sealed Monarch was a thing as well. Fatigue is just something that happens. In fact, I was very happy to see in Bright Lights they just put that hard cap on the amount of cards that both decks could play, because you had sealed tournaments like the sealed Light versus Dark, Light versus Shadow, whatever you want to call it, event where people were running 45, 50 cards, and fatigue very much was a factor of A, did you banish any blood debt, and B, do I have more cards in my deck that block 3 than you did? So actually the sensible response, which I called for when we started getting Shapeshifter sealed, and I said this format doesn't work because people could just play more block 3s, actually ended up getting implemented into sealed format in Bright Lights, where they put a cap of 40 cards of a deck to prevent that exact problem where someone might just open 45 3-block cards versus someone else opening 40, and then suddenly one deck is fatiguing the other one. And a lot of the games did come down to that crunch of, I have 1 or 2 more cards more than you, and I'm cycling them more efficiently, therefore I can kill you with my Teklo pistol. So, that was a very big factor.
Put a sour taste in people's mouths, because when the way to succeed in a format is to essentially, I don't say not play, but outlast your opponent through just existing longer than they are, that has to be something that you guys are cognizant of and aware of, that is harmful to the enjoyment experience. How fatigue as
I don't really like that that definition, to be honest. Like in Bright Lights, so it's completely true of older formats like Oldhim in Tales of Aria, and those fatigue decks that came out with Oldhim. And one of the reasons that he went away. But in Bright Lights, fatigue is how you win, but it's not actually how you're winning the game, right? The whole thing about Bright Lights draft and sealed, having played quite a lot of them over the World's Weekend, is if you get to the last turn, and that's the only time, you get to like the last 10 cards in your deck, and that's the first time you've thought about being card efficient, then yeah, you're going to get fatigued and it's going to feel terrible. But the whole thing about Bright Lights is that it is an expression of resource usage in the deck. Like, how often do I boost and how many cards do I get from my opponent when I boost is a huge question. How much do I block versus taking damage when I need this card later? Like, the fact is that the rate of attacking with a 6-power attack and getting 2 cards for your 1 is so vital to the format that actually you fatigue through aggression as much as you fatigue through defense. And that's what makes it an interesting format. So I feel like it's important to not just phrase fatigue as outlasting your opponent, because a lot of those Teklo or Max versus Teklo games came down to fatigue, i.e. who had more cards in the end of the deck and could keep attacking. But fatigue wasn't the reason that player won. That player won because of efficient card usage through the entire game. Now, there is an argument that the turn patterns that led to most efficient card usage were ultimately not as fun as they could be, because for Teklo, the efficient turn was shoot your weapon with 3 or more Evos, and whoever got those 3 Evos first was kind of close to winning the game, and then fire off some, a 2 for 5 power attack that requires 2 cards or taking 2 life. And with someone like Max, it was, attack with a 5-cost attack, make a hyperdrive a single weapon. And because both of those patterns say, I'm spending 1 card to get 2 or 3 cards, that's where the value comes in, right? And if you play that pattern enough, you win through fatigue. And then you've got Dash, who was fully capable of just absolutely destroying people with boom grenades and overpower. But the point is that to say fatigue is outlasting your opponent kind of belittles, in Bright Lights especially, the level of aggressive play required to get to that fatigue state where you could let the fact that you have 1 or 2 more cards left win. So I just want to say my piece on that. I think it's important to think about fatigue in the right way. It's not just about blocking entirely. You can fatigue through damage. You can fatigue through aggression, just by sending cards that take more to block than they cost to attack with.
An experience. How do you approach fatigue as a viable strategy, but a healthy strategy?
I think this is a great question for you.
First of all, my fatigue has always been in the game, and we don't always see it as a problem rather than a feature of the game. Like there's certain points where things go too far, and it's a very fine line where you want certain heroes to function in a way where they do win by fatigue, but not just dominate by fatigue. And if you look at Bright Lights, the consensus was, yes, Teklo Vossen is the best deck, and it's by fatigue, and you just draft your 3 blocks. But the more and more you draft, the more depth you see in items, the dash.
Yeah, exactly. Dash fully capable of just killing Teklo Vossen if they try and just block 12 every turn. The difference between Teklo in Bright Lights, where he can block 12 every turn, and someone like Oldhim was that Oldhim was potentially blocking 14 to 16 every turn between the crown and defense reactions and the shield. And that meant that your entire game as Oldhim might just be block until they run out of red cards and then just take their cards with hammer swings every turn. Versus Bright Lights, where there is very much that decision of how I'm going to be card efficient with both my blocks and my attacks, which is an entirely different monster and is much more fun.
The dash strategies and the mech strategies where instead of just playing your cards out, you do it turn by turn. You don't play turn by turn, you play like every other turn and set up big ways to push past. And it's not as simple as just throwing everything at the wall and just trying to push through a Teklo Vossen. And the fine lines are, if we make Teklo Vossen too good, obviously he just beats everything by fatigue. But if we just take too much away, he's just never going to win, and the mech sticks and the dash sticks are always going to push through him. And like we see that as a feature rather than a flaw a lot of the time, but it takes a lot of like play. So I guess when people play straight away, and that's the first assumption, that can be like tricky. But there are layers to it, and like we don't always see it as a bad thing.
Well, I've always felt, for example, that you've addressed fatigue to a degree with heroes like Arachne, and any kind of mill strategy against like the dominant strategy and winning approach to playing fatigue is, I'm just going to have more cards than you at the end of the game. I'm going to lean on my weapon and efficient, card economy to win. I feel like Arachne is the solution to that. I just feel that fatigue always is coupled with this mindset of a steadfast defense. My cards are just going to efficiently match up pound for pound with yours. Was Arachne, if this is your baby, was Arachne almost designed as an antidote to fatigue to a degree?
I wouldn't say it was pointed directly towards that issue, but also you have to understand that.
I mean, it's not pointed directly towards that issue because Arachne's attacks are reasonably easy to block. I mean, yeah, you've got Shred and you've got the attack reactions, but he usually only comes in for 3 or 4 or 5, right? If you really need to block Arachne, you can.
I don't blanket perceive it as an issue. Like, I think the fatigue aspect of Flesh and Blood adds so much to gameplay, and it adds another axis you have to consider. You have to manage not only your life total, not only your opponent's life total, but you have to manage your resources and cards in deck, and it very much embodies the flavor of this knockdown, drag-out fight that's going to take every ounce of your being to complete to actually finish your opponent. That's the Flesh and Blood progression. You start with all your equipment, and you start with all your cards in deck, and things get weaker as the game goes on.
See, I like this. I think it's very good to capsulate Fab. The designers kind of want a game where almost all of your good red attacks are gone, and you're trying to find the way to get across the finish line with that final bit of energy that you've got. Like, that is very much the Fab, hero pit fight feeling of we're running out of tools, we're running out of power. So, I agree that fatigue feels good when it's done perfectly, because you feel so rewarded when you break through a hero that has been, trying to control you and play slowly during the game.
I think fatigue very much represents that in a very beautiful, flavorfully mechanic way. I think where the issues show up is that it is a very hard skill check. You have to recognize that fatigue is an axis that you are playing the game on. And it especially manifests in bright lights. Like, Chris, you're mentioning the adaptable strategies of Max, of Dash. There were so many times in testing where to find the winning line with Max, I realized I needed to not boost on this turn. I needed to not play a card on this turn. I needed to play towards a larger turn in the future. And that's very much inherent in the Dash kit too. Dash very much pitch stacking those items early, setting up those big overpowered boom grenades in the late game. It's critical. You have to engage with the format like that from the first turn of the game. You have to be thinking about these things.
And that's one of the things actually that made Bright Lights quite harder for more casual players and other people to get involved in as a set, which made them feel like they weren't as good at it. Bright Lights is a very interesting set because from what I've witnessed, there's a gap between casual, like total casual, and hyper competitive, where the semi-casual, semi-competitive people kind of fall down. The super casual people are having a really great time. They're super chilled out, and they're... Sorry, just have a dog.
I think that's really strategically interesting. I think a lot of our players find that really strategically interesting.
Yeah, so just to finish off that thought, so the casual players are having fun. They're drafting the hero they like. They're attacking. They complain a bit about being fatigued by Teklo, but sometimes they get a cracked deck with Max and Dash and things line up and they feel great, right? The super competitive players are doing exactly what he said. They're pitch stacking. They're delaying their turns. They're setting things up. They're doing all of that kind of stuff. And then you've got the casual people who maybe don't have as much time to practice, who don't get into it as much. And they're kind of thinking, oh, these items seem good, and then they've got too many of them from a draft. They're kind of a bit rougher on the pitch stacking, so they can't set up those big turns. And for them, I feel like a lot of this set isn't connecting as well. So I feel like the super casual people are having fun. They're just drafting the heroes they like, and sometimes it's working. And when it doesn't work, they're fine with it. And the competitive people are figuring out the solution. And there's just this band in the middle who are getting a bit frustrated with the complexity of the set. But it's a good set. It's a good complex set for drafting, which is good.
It's just when that gets kind of obscured a little bit and you have to dig a little bit under the surface. Yeah, it's hard for players to find that inroad sometimes, particularly our newer players. And I think we always have to be conscious of just giving them safe inroads to power through, to push that damage and to do exciting stuff.
Dude, you're preaching to the choir. Every game I've ever played, I've been playing card games for 25 years, same with all of you. I've been playing for years and years and years. And there's a certain level of satisfaction when you see your opponent draw their last card and you're like kind of like you did your best, kid, but like I got you, man. But the other question here is the discussion, James, about potentially having deck limits. And we have the deck limit, but you can show up between 60 and however many cards, but with a minimum 60. Have you ever thought about an actual cap of 60?
We are looking at these sorts of things all the time in the dev process, and there will be some limited formats coming out that have hard deck size caps on them, so you can look forward to that. One of the beautiful things about Flesh and Blood is that we are always trying to offer
Deck size caps just make perfect sense in Limited. Like, you need to just stop luck giving someone more blocks that just end up in fatigue in any format, so it just feels like having a deck size cap makes a lot of sense. It is interesting that they've considered it for more constructed formats. I feel like it would serve a purpose to combat fatigue and make, games feel quite crunchy, but I think it would also restrict players quite a lot in a way that we probably don't want to restrict. So I think that's probably an argument against deck caps, but it's an interesting idea.
For new puzzles to our fans, right? And, that goes right down to how we engineer the products. You can see with Bright Lights, it was a very innovative approach for Flesh and Blood towards the actual product engineering with a single class. So a completely new experience you didn't have in any of our previous products. Similar sort of things can happen through, things like hard caps on the deck size. And you can expect to see that in some of the upcoming sets.
Beautiful.
But it's just worth noting that, removing deck size is also a big problem as well. Like, when they initially added the sideboard and the extra 5 cards, and the fact that you could play, your entire inventory in Blitz, that led to quite a degenerate fatigue deck that was just willing to slam down 47 cards and only run 4 pieces of equipment into every game. And, so having a deck cap in something like Blitz makes perfect sense. Having it in CC doesn't, because the flexibility is more appreciated, but you can kind of see why having a deck cap is such a huge decision for them either way, because if they do it and it goes badly, you could have more fatigue, and if they do it and it goes well, then, people just won't have as much freedom in the future to experiment.
So the other question is again, you guys are mentioning Bright Lights and strategies regarding it, is that we just came off of Bright Lights is in full swing, and I mean, as we're recording this, they just wrapped up a round 3 where Techno was undefeated. It's a great thing to see.
Yeah.
There's this.
For those of you who are wondering, these questions were almost certainly agreed in advance with LSS, and this interview feels like it was definitely planned in advance. You notice the way he's going to individual people to answer specific questions. This isn't freeform. I think on his document he has ask about this, ask this person about this, and LSS are deciding as well to kind of field it to different people. There's nothing wrong with this. It's a good way of handling interviews on difficult topics and making sure everyone gets involved. I know if I'm hosting a panel, I will usually keep track of how many times someone has given a response to a point, and if they haven't given a response to a point, I will go to that person with a specific question later on and just make sure I'm getting a response from them. But it's just something to notice. Like, if you're wondering, this seems to be quite rote, I definitely think they've agreed these questions in advance, which I would entirely do if I was doing an interview with LSS. And if I was LSS, I wouldn't agree to an interview where I didn't have a rough idea of what questions were going to be.
We can call it a fallacy that sets like Dusk Till Dawn and Bright Lights were no impact on the meta. I don't buy that.
Bright Lights is 100% going to have an impact on the meta. Dash.io is very interesting. Max is very interesting. Teklo is just waiting for something. Like, it's waiting for AB, or it's waiting for something, because basically it was waiting for Icelander to go, and now that Icelander's gone, it's just missing some piece of the puzzle. But I feel like Teklevossen, from a story perspective, is the villain in waiting. Like, Dash and Max, look, I always view card games through the lens of stories, because I know that's how they're written. We were told Chain was deliberately made more powerful because he was supposed to be the villain, right? Teklevossen is the villain of Bright Lights, and Max and Dash are the people we're supposed to love. So the fact is that Bright Lights has been designed to put Max and Dash in the forefront of the narrative in a way that makes us care about them. And once we care about them sufficiently, there's going to be Bright Lights 2, or the second set that deals with Mechanologist, where Teklevossen's evil plan is going to finally be realised, which is going to lead to some suffering for Max and Dash, which we're going to care a lot more about because we've been so invested in them based on the fact that they were the playable heroes in Bright Lights and of course Dash beforehand. So I think that is 100% going on in the background. Dust to Dawn didn't have a meta impact because the set was weird. Like, the commons were bad, the heroes that came out of it didn't seem balanced very well against what was going on in the rest of the game. Maybe they'll be good at some point when all these Tales of Aria Uprising heroes are gone, but they kind of just feel like they were designed with a different power scale in mind, so it'll be interesting to see what they say about that.
I understand that, because you look at the top 3 decks that are represented, 4, 5, even 6 decks that are represented here in the field. It's Icelander, it's Dromai, it's Bravo, on and on and on. How do you respond to that sentiment that people look at Dusk Till Dawn, said, there was nothing for me, not interested. Bright Lights, not my kind of thing. Is it something you guys are aware of and are adjusting, or do you just not buy into the fact that these are non-impactful sets?
So I think there's 2 points on that. The first is Dusk Till Dawn honestly just fell a bit flat, against our expectations, to be honest. We thought that Prism would be a lot more impactful on the tournament scene than she was. I do have very high hopes for her in the coming seasons, and she's
Prism expansion slot cards. That's a sign. We're going to get Prism expansion slot cards that make her a lot more powerful. So if you're a Prism fan, just get involved.
A hero that is not complete yet. So for all the Prism fans out there, stay hopeful, stay positive on Prism getting.
We know we're having a Monarch 3, so these heroes will be getting more support. They will be getting stronger, but it is still a problem that they were released in their current state. We can have a whole discussion about Prism, but I'll sum up my current thoughts on it very, very briefly. Prism is not a hero designed for original Prism fans, right? I know at least 2 people who've quit Prism because she just doesn't play the way that they were sold she would play out of Monarch, which is this instant speed, spectral shield controlling, that kind of basis. She's turned into this, I'm going to hit you with this big attack and then do some other stuff on the side kind of hero, which really isn't what they signed up for. And I think that's one of the reasons that she fell so flat from Dusk to Dawn, is just that she plays completely differently to how she played before. That's not to say that how she played before wasn't problematic and didn't have its issues, and there's a reason why it's a good thing that she's not like that anymore, but it's just worth being aware.
Good in the future, and I mean, people who have listened to my interviews in the past know how near and dear Prism is to my heart. So yeah, we'll do good by Prism. You can count on that. But to be frank, Dusk to Dawn did fall.
Prism is James White's favourite hero, and you can tell because he made a statue of her. Just going to leave that out there. Don't see my statues of any of my other heroes, do I? No. But Prism is a statue. I bet there's one of those that James White has in his house, like the prototype, and I bet it's like bigger and more glorious. Just putting that out there.
Flat and below expectations. On the flip side, though, I think that Bright Lights was judged too quickly by the community, if I'm being honest about it. And we saw it with the Calling Melbourne a couple of weeks ago with Thomas Downing. Nearly completing the flawless victory, 14-0 all the way to the final match of the Calling Melbourne, and
but then he drew all items on one turn and died. Like, a lot of the bad judgment about Bright Lights isn't that the cards are bad or the classes are bad or that people don't want the heroes to be good. It's that the heroes feel like they're playing a different game when, Dash.io can just draw a hand of items at a bad moment and take 20 damage and lose the game on the spot, right? That's the problem. Or that Max is just sitting there being like, well, I couldn't boost this turn because I had to block with 9 cards, so I'll just pass back to you. Like, there's a reason that people don't like the set. It's not because people underestimated the potential power. Some of them did, but not everyone did. It's more because people are playing these heroes and are saying this doesn't feel like it's good. Like, Dash.io doesn't feel like she gives you agency on those turns when you draw all items, and sometimes you just can't stop it, So that I don't know if that's entirely fair, but let's keep going.
Just falling short at the post.
What hero won that one?
Azuri. But Dash.io in the hands of Thomas, going 14-0. And look, that was a tough tournament. He beat players such as Michael Fung, Pro Tour champion.
It was a good deck with a lot of power, and he spent a lot of time reducing the variance. But it is telling that ultimately what killed him watching that final was a 3-item hand, i.e. the variance of the deck, right? Let's just keep that in mind, okay? And Swiss itself is variance, but all this means is that, much like Reinhard before him, if 25 players showed up on Dash.io, one of them would have a golden run where they never drew items at the wrong time and controlled the deck very well. And it is, I'm talking about variance, it is also an expression of skill, because later on in the game you shouldn't be bricking on full item hands because you'll be stacking your deck, you'll be pitching things at the right time, you'll be doing all these things to stop that from happening. But it can also happen as a variance in the first cycle of the deck where you just have a really bad hand where you take tons of damage, right? Which, against some heroes like Katsu or Max, or against some of the more aggressive heroes like Fi, is just a death sentence, because Katsu will just say, okay, you drew 3 items on this turn, but I'm presenting 30 damage, your move, So it is a bit tricky from the perspective of, these are our heroes who are super consistent, and now we're seeing Bright Lights, and here are some heroes that aren't consistent. And it's hard not to see like Dash.io as just the new Levier or the new Brute who just draws badly and therefore can't do anything or just dies, right?
He beat Butcher, yeah?
Nick Butcher? I'm not sure.
Well, Nick Butcher was...
Well, the deck has insane power when everything lines up, that's for sure. And more people will be playing it in the future. It will get more refined. Dash.io are very likely to stick around and be an impact in the future.
In that tournament on the top table was number 1 ranked ELO player in the world.
And I don't say the same thing about Dusk to Dawn, because I think New Prism is bad until they print more cards that support her. I think Vincent is not as good again for the same reason. Levia is just still killing herself despite having got lots of support. And Bolton is not going to be as good as Newcastle. So there you go.
So look, there were a lot of very, very. Brody Spurlock was in the tournament as well. You know, number 1 ranked XP for the Americas. So they're all.
Brody's playing Dash.io today.
And Brody is playing Dash.io today. So look, I feel. Like,
And no one was in the top cut on Dash.io. I don't know how high they got, but they didn't get that high.
like the community was very quick to judge Bright Lights in terms of how potent it was. And on the flip side, though, it is a very complex set. If we think about the complexity scale, Bright Lights really sits at the top of the complexity, and you can expect heavy hitters and other sets that are coming through the pipeline in 2004 to be quite a few notches below the complexity of Bright Lights. So
That's good. I admire Bright Lights as a complex set, but I feel like if every set was like that, it would start to turn some people off. Like, heavy hitters should just be a powerful romp through these power classes, Guardian, Brute, Warrior, that people love, that are just smashing people with big attacks and doing fun effects and wagers. And it should just be fun, not as complex, right? We can handle one of these sets every now and then, but not all the time.
So we have to be a little bit fair to the community as well. Of like, we did present them with a very challenging puzzle with Bright Lights, and we're starting to see, you know, well, obviously Dash.io really emerging as being a very serious competitor in this new metagame, and we're seeing Tekla 3-0 at the World Championship, winning that last feature match.
One of those was a buy, so just to clarify as well. And that deck, I've played it. I do not understand how you stay awake playing that deck. Like, you are blocking so much to get your Evos equipped, you take damage, and it's just like, oh, what are my tools here? Like, against a really aggro deck, your only option is to block or bleed out, and I don't know. I think it still has a way to go.
You know, some big names sleeved up. Max Nitro. We had Matthew Rogers. We had Chris Ayali, finalist from World Championship 2022, playing Max Nitro at the tournament today. So there's some big believers in these Bright Lights heroes. To your point of some people saying maybe this set is not for me, I would like to point towards the expansion slot, because there is something for you in these products, and we were very deliberate.
I mean, there is something for you in this product, but you can also buy it on the singles market for like 20 quid, with the exception of Tome, right? Like, it's hard to use the expansion slot with such low drop rates of specific cards for your class as a justification for you buying like packs of this set. But I do agree, it is a reason to be invested in the set as a player who is not actively, you know, interested in mechanologists. It's one of the reasons that I've been getting cards from this set is for my assassin deck, right?
About that, because sure, we made
the expansion, just to say, I'm not down on it, the expansion slot is a fantastic addition to the game. It is a great way to give one or two specific cards to a class that is not getting supported in the set and keep them relevant in the metagame. Whoever thought it up, you know, deserves a pay rise. It is a fantastic addition to the game. It has the weird side effect of sometimes coming up with a £50 card for a class that doesn't drop that often, but they could just reprint that next set as well, because it's not tied to the theme of the set. So if they need Tome to come down in price, they could just leave it in the expansion slot for heavy hitters, and that would be fine, and the price would come down. So, you know, it's a really useful tool, and it'll be really interesting to see how they use it in future.
Set with only one class in it. Of course, not everybody likes mechanologist, and that's okay. But we do have the expansion slot introducing, you know, new content for people who like a range of different classes or heroes. And yeah, there were some duds in the expansion slot of Bright Light, but there's also some bangers in there as well. And as we move forward with heavy hitters and further into 2024, I think we're really juicing up the expansion slot even further, yeah?
Yes, juice the expansion slot. Give me all the power. More ninja cards every set. That's what we need. No, this wax on, wax off nonsense, right? Where's my draconic card that actually works for Phi? None of it's Imperial Tome. That's not going in my Phi deck ever. Give me a 0 for 5 that does something spicy. Don't do that. That's too powerful. But you know what I mean. Give me some spice.
So this is okay. Real quick here, the expansion slot is something that's here to stay.
Absolutely, yeah.
They would be so foolish if they got rid of it after how good it has been received and how well it has worked.
This is something I still refer to it as the carnival slot. I just think it's funnier and it's awesome. It's better.
Yeah.
You specifically because I like to pick on you. That's just the way we
Fair.
go. You mentioned that in Dusk Till Dawn testing, etc., that Prism was gonna just blow people away. Like this was a hero, which it hasn't yet.
Yep.
In terms of when you rate a hero by success, because you mentioned by all.
Phantasm is just that impactful on your reliability and predictability as a quality hero. And if people can pop your attacks reliably, then you don't really want to play Phantasm in that meta.
You know, by your own admission and your own evaluation, that Dusk Till Dawn was not a success that you wanted it to be.
Yeah.
How do you evaluate that success? Is it commercial? Is it the reception of it? The how people like it? And when you mentioned that Bright Lights, you said, I don't think people gave it a shot. I agree, because people just see that it's not a class that I like, therefore I don't like this set. That I feel is an unfair evaluation. But when it comes to Dusk Till Dawn, there was stuff for everybody, and you said that it didn't quite hit the mark. What are the metrics you're looking at? What are those kinds of criteria?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak specifically to Prism and kind of the sentiment that would be really strong. And to be frank, there was a bit of a flaw in our development process, and we've since addressed that flaw. And I don't mind talking about kind of what it was. We were very much looking at these decks across broad matchup spreads and thinking about how does the overall matchup spread work. And Prism has a lot of really good matchups, really, really strong matchups. And to be fair, they require a great degree of technical play. She's probably the hardest hero to play we've ever released. And some of that gets obscured in our internal testing because we have such talented players. Chris was killing everyone with Prism in testing, just all the time.
Yeah,
absolutely unbeatable.
Yeah.
And
I don't like this kind of answer, not because it's incorrect, like it might be correct, but lots of good players who've been playing Prism have gone off her because they feel like she's not working in the current environment. And those are people with a high technical skill level. So we're now here 4 or 5, 6 months after the sets come out, and we're still being told she's so technical, to play her well is very, very difficult. And I would argue, and not to be harsh to them, because I think she's interesting, if you designed a hero where the only person who can play it is that one person on your testing team who's like a savant with the game, and none of your top players who've been playing that hero previously feel like they can make her work, like, that's a failure of design. So it's a bit like, I get why you're saying it, and it could be entirely true, but it's still a bit crap, like, 6 months down the line after the set comes out, that we're still being told she's very technical, people just can't play her at her top level. Like, who are the people who are supposed to be playing this hero at her top level? Where are they? Do they exist? And if they're not in the player base, then why has this hero been designed the way she's been designed? Anyway, that's a whole other rant about Prism, right? I used to like Prism, but
the issue was we didn't put enough stock in the fact that Prism has an absolutely miserable matchup in the metagame, and that's Dromai. And we were aware of that. We knew that matchup was very tough. But you just go, well, that's a bad matchup. Yeah, every hero has bad matchups. That's totally reasonable. Dromai has been such a fixture in the metagame that it actually makes it so it's not worth it to put in the type of energy, the type of reps you need to become a competent Prism player against the broader metagame, because you're going to get destroyed.
So we're going to put a flag in the sand then on this one, okay? And we're going to come back to this, because Dromai is well on the course for Living Legend, right? We're going to come back to Prism once Dromai has Living Legend, and we're going to say to Prism, is she now relevant in the metagame, right? So Brian is putting his flag in the sand. Dromai is the problem. Prism has plenty of good matchups into other decks. So when Dromai's gone, let's revisit this. Let's go back to Prism, and let's say, is she now good in the meta, or is she still not relevant? Now, I suspect, just putting it out there, that heavy hitters will have a lot of cards with 6+ power, and I suspect that when Dromai goes, we're going to have a new Guardian. We're going to have a new Brute, and she's still not going to be relevant in the meta because she's got some fundamental flaws with her design. But it also just doesn't address the fact that one of the reasons, and if I had been doing this interview, I potentially would have asked this question, and maybe if Brian ever watches this video, he can tweet to me, that, like, one of the problems with Prism isn't that she's not good in the metagame, but she has a bad Dromai matchup. That is obviously one of the problems. The other problem is just the drastic difference between how Prism originally played as a competitive deck and the deck we have now, and how people respond to that playstyle shift. And a lot of those players haven't followed you on that journey because they've basically been handled a completely different hero with the same name, right? Which is not what they wanted. They wanted more of the control, instant speed, aura-based gameplay with permanence and inflections, even though there were problems with it. And what they got handed, essentially, is a Herald aggro package with bonuses from Figments, right? And it's not necessarily what they wanted. So I think that's also part of the problem as well. We can't just talk about Dromai. But when Dromai goes, we'll see if Prism is good then.
By that one bad matchup, and you know that. So why would you invest the time to totally figure out that other portion of the metagame? And this realization has changed so much about the way we structure our heroes, about the tools we give our heroes, and I think for the better. And I am disappointed in how Prism fell. I agree with James. Prism is going to have her moment in the sun. That is an inherently powerful special hero. We don't assign a hero 32 life thinking that this hero doesn't have the potential to be absolutely pushed to the moon. And I'll tell you, I was terrified releasing Prism. Like, I was very afraid.
That apprehension.
Yeah. A lot of strength around that hero.
Like, seeing 32 life, it's like everyone saw the smoke, but no one saw the fire with it. But Chris, like, what's this, like, secret recipe, dude? Because he was telling, and, like, everybody's like, well, it's not like it's Michael Hamilton or Brody Spurlock or Pablo Pintor they're testing. There's some pretty, pardon my language, fucking good players that play on the testing team and within your crew. And when you're out there dummying people with Prism, it's not like you're just dunking on some randos. It's good players.
Yeah.
And
calling champions like Jacob Pearson and Jason Chung, who's just like a fantastic player in his own right.
So I'm gonna ask you one quick thing. What are you doing with Prism that everybody is missing, and is it not for you to say?
I can't really even explain it, to be honest. I just see the hero a bit differently, I think, than anyone else in the dev room. They all have their own takes, and I play matchups in ways that they don't expect. If I gave the Prism deck to any other dev member, they would not play it similar to me, and I'm not sure what it is specifically, but I just tended to have a very, very good win rate with the hero. Dromai was obviously terrible, but against everything else, she was good. And I think one of the issues with Prism is, like, face up, she's just hard to play. Like, someone can't just pick the cards up and make them work. And that's one of the real problems with Prism, because that removes anyone even wanting to try it from the beginning. When you make heroes complicated, and there's already really powerful heroes like Lexi in the metagame, why even just try?
But we're kind of just getting hints that their in-house testing meta is a bit weird. Like, you've got one player who's playing a deck completely differently, and he can't even articulate how to play that deck. Like, that makes no sense. Like, you should be able to, if it's there, you should be able to explain it to these other players if they're good enough to match you, right? And they should be able to learn whatever you're doing and repeat it. It's not like this is some, like, you know, special arcanum or skill or, you know, weird mystery of the world that only one person can unlock because he's the only one who speaks, you know, ancient something, you know. Like, if he's playing the Prism deck in a certain way with people who are at his level, then they should be able to copy what he is doing. But also they should be able to counter it in a way that, like, beats him. Like, so it's a bit tricky when we get statements like this to really understand exactly what's going on and how it, you know, how it isn't sort of taken down, because there are so many ways and weaknesses of Prism that have been revealed in the current metagame, not just against Dromai, that where were those while they were testing Prism in-house, I guess is the question.
Something so hard. But I don't know, I think I just see things differently while playing the game, specifically with that hero. And I worked a lot on the original Prism, so I don't know, I have an affinity for the hero in general.
It takes a specific coding in your DNA to play that way.
I haven't had to just like break down exactly what I do in each matchup in a dev room. So it's like I don't think in that term. I just sit down in the game, try and figure out my strategy in each matchup, and I stick to that strategy.
But he should have had to break it down. Like, if only one person is winning on a hero and you're trying to figure out if that hero is accessible, something the players will understand, or whether that playstyle is reasonable and can be countered, he should be breaking it down. So this is a bit confusing, I would say, this respond.
Normally it works.
I think that's the key. I think that when you're looking at, well, not just Prism, but the game in general, you're not really thinking about turn to turn. You're thinking about what is my strategy and my plan for this matchup. Yeah.
Just simple things like some matchups you don't flip a single angel, and then on the end game, then you flip 2 per turn each turn cycle. Certain decks like Guardians or even Azuris that have daggers, they just can't deal with it. Once you start just putting the pressure on, once the game's gone through 40 turns or whatever it is, then you start playing the game. And it's
40 turns, what everybody wants to hear.
yeah, exactly. But games take a long time when you want to play them well. So
Yeah.
Winning is
There you have it, guys. Secret Spy says to not transform your angels. Go, 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 go.
is part patience as well, and that's part of the win condition.
This guy is very patient with his figments. You gotta build your board in some matchups, before you start flipping them.
There's games where you're on 5 life and they're still on 35.
Yeah,
And you're like, I got this.
I got this.
You always feel like you're losing. You always feel like you're losing in Prism until you win, and that's just how it always happens.
I played Prism in the Starvo meta. I know all about spectacular comebacks and such. So I know that I live on that edge as well. We got about 10 minutes left at most here.
Just to finish one other thing that kind of I enjoy puzzles in the game, but it is the case, because he said there that he didn't feel like Prism was signposted well. People couldn't pick up the deck and figure out how to play it properly. And to me, that is one of the fundamental cores of designing a game, is to put in the signposts that tell you how something is supposed to be done. There was a really interesting interview with the Super Mario 64 developer years ago, and he said something that I'll always remember, which is, when we were designing this, it was the first 3D world we'd ever made. And previously we were making Mario, and it made perfect sense. People ran in a straight line. And he was like, how do we get people on this open world maps that we've made, where it's a mountain, or it's a snow mountain, or it's all these other things that they created, or it's a water palace, and all these other maps. I mean, if you played Mario, you understand. Then he said, how do we get people to the objectives they need and to get them to the puzzles they have to go to when, without arrows or signs, but making it feel like the player has earned their way towards that puzzle. And he said that the secret they found was just that if they put in an achievement and a star for collecting coins, and then they put in a line of coins that pointed in the rough direction of all the puzzles that they wanted and got you close enough to see it, and then when you saw it, you'd say, okay, cool, that looks interesting, let me go and have a look at it. And you see the evolution of that into something like Breath of the Wild, where all it really takes to get people to shrines is a telescope, and the shrines are orange when they're not completed, and blue when they're completed, and they know that there's a reward in there. So from a distance, from a cliff, from the edge of a mountain, from the bottom of a hill, you'll see that glint of orange, and you'll be like, oh, there's a puzzle up there. And you'll go and you'll find it. And when we're looking at something like New Prism, I guess the question is, and they kind of said that they didn't feel that it was, those markers that tell you, hey, there's a shrine hidden at the top of that mountain don't really feel like they're there. And then you add in the Dromai matchup, and it just doesn't really feel like it's worth finding them. So, I guess, is that a problem for the players, or is it a problem for the design? And this is only going to be solved with time. So if he claims that the hints are there and he's given out some more about how he plays certain matchups now, we really have to say, as I said earlier, if Dromai goes, what happens to Prism then? And if she becomes, the new meta hero and she's stomping over heroes and having a great time, I'll fully just go on and I won't eat my hat because I need that because it's cold, but I'll definitely eat a bit of, is it crow, I guess? Anyway, I'll definitely be apologetic for my stance on Prism, but currently I just feel like you've designed a hero that's drastically different to what the people who want to play her feel like they want, and you keep telling people that there's a mystery out there that they just can't find when you're the people who created the mystery. So it's a bit like only Chris I have nothing. I've met Chris, he's lovely, and I'm not beating up on him like this, but this does sound like only Chris Gehring is good enough to play Prism with a positive win rate. No one else has found out how to do it, and we don't think they're trying because of how bad the Dromai matchup is. But I say lots of people tried, regardless of how hard the Dromai matchup was, because they liked Prism, and they just didn't find what they were looking for, either in terms of a similar game pattern to what existed before, or or just that feeling of power and ability to win late game that justified the 32 life. It just feels like people haven't found that. So maybe I'm wrong, but we'll see.
One of the things I just wanted to mention, just to close up that point, was that there's so much there's a loud vocal. It's the internet. It's 2023. You're gonna hear everything coming back. One thing that LSS
He's talking about me, by the way, just so you know.
has done very well is admit when you're wrong. And one of the tough things that you'll never get coming back is you will get dunked on hard all the time. But when somebody makes
it does take a while. Like, I mean, even this Prism stuff has taken a while for them to admit that they were wrong. But they do. And I think that is important. Like, they shouldn't be admitting they're wrong too quickly. They shouldn't throw up their hands and be like, no, we screwed up. They should leave the puzzle in the hands of the players for as long as possible before admitting that there was a mistake. Like, I don't think, like, if something's broken, it's broken. But otherwise, you should just leave the toys with the people and see what the people do with them, right? Treat card games more like Lego than like a recipe or a manual, and even if something goes wrong with Lego, you can still have a lot of fun with the pieces you've got, even though they're not all there, something like that.
assessment of something and it's wrong, they're not on the hook for anything. They can walk away from it and will never get called
must
up.
be nice.
It must be nice. You're right. One of the things that you guys do is when you guys make a mistake, there's that screenshot of we made a mistake, the Dusk thing, right? That seems to be something that you guys hold fast to, and I'm going to take this opportunity to say, if you're listening to this out there and you've made a shitty take and you're wrong, just own it. It's not a big deal because they do. So.
But the difference is fundamentally that one group, the content creators, are consumers of a product, and the other group are a group of people designing a product to sell to you. Like, they have the power, the money, and the vested interest in designing something that you're going to keep buying. As a content creator, I have the desire to have fun and the desire to get the most fun out of my time that I can. And therefore, if something goes wrong, it's my desire to say, hey, I'm not having fun with this. Or, hey, something has gone wrong and I don't feel like it's good. Like, I'm not... Obviously, if I have a really bad take, I'm going to go out there and say, hey, I thought that was wrong. But most of the takes that you end up doing in these kind of videos are reactions to the situation that is existent at the moment. And if that changes, then obviously your take changes. So me saying Prism is a terrible hero that no one can figure out how to play, if she suddenly becomes really popular because all it took was Dromai to disappear, then I'll be talking about things in a different way. So I don't really agree with this. I feel like if you're making a product for consumers, you have to take the reviews that come with it, the good and the bad. And that's not to say that everyone has a valid opinion. And I feel like if people are ranting and raving and being rude to you, then that's another thing. But if people are genuinely saying, I'm concerned about X because I think it's not fun, like, for instance, before Bright Lights, I said I'm concerned about the sealed format because I think deck sizes are coming down too much to, like, how many block cards you open, and especially Shapeshifter sealed. I was very vocal about the fact that needs an upward deck size cap as well. And then that got brought in Bright Lights, and what's the first thing I say? I say it's fantastic, this is happening. Okay, but here's the other issue with the product. The difference is always being constructive and always trying to be positive, because Flesh and Blood is fantastic, but, there are things that can be talked about and should be talked about from an objective competitive discussion. And I recently just finished doing 2 videos on 2 DQs that happened at the World Championships, and one of those was someone getting DQ'd for looking around the tournament and seeing some cards during the draft that he shouldn't have seen. And there are 2 things that went wrong there. The first is that his opponent was holding his cards quite far in front of him in a situation where it was quite easy for someone looking around to see the cards. And the other thing that happened was that player had quite aggressive ADHD and found it very hard to sit still and keep his eyes in one place while staying competitively minded in the draft. So that needs to be talked about. The other DQ was one player who suggested a prize split, which his opponent misinterpreted as being a concession, and then got DQ'd for it. Right? Now, there is a problem with the Flesh and Blood rules where prize splits are legal, but they can't affect the outcome of the game. So if I say, hey, let's split, but it's worth more money to me to then lose the game to you, I'm heavily incentivized to agree a prize split and then lose, but not concede. Like, there is a lot of grey area and ambiguity there that also needs to be discussed. So there's all these situations going on where, as a content creator, we have responsibility to be critical, analytical, and commentate, not going into meanness, not going into harshness or attacking individual people directly or calling out specific people. Like, I'm not on here saying, oh, James White and Brian, they can't make a card game. Prism was terrible. They need to get rid of half of their design team. You know, fire Chris. You know, all this. No, we're not here doing that because that would be ridiculous. We're just here saying, hey, you know, Dust to Dawn wasn't great. Like, we can focus on Prism all we want, but there were 3 other heroes in that set who failed to make a metagame impact, despite getting an additional, 250 cards between the 3 of them, or between the 4 of them. So, you know, we can talk about Prism all we want, but Bolton isn't on the competitive scene either. Vincent has failed to make a splash, and Levia was around for a bit until people realized that none of her cards actually fix her fundamental problem. So, you know, it's perfectly fair to talk about Bright Lights and how much of unfortunately, a failure it was. We can talk about that. We have the platform to talk about that, precisely because most of the other sets they've released haven't been a failure in the way that Dust to Dawn was, right? We can talk about the issues in Dust to Dawn because Welcome to Wraith was a banger, and Crucible of War was a banger, and Tales of Aria was a banger, and all of these sets were really good, which is why the game is still alive 4 years later. So it's okay that Dust to Dawn wasn't great, but we're not going to say that it was great. We're not going to blow smoke here and pretend that everything smells like roses. And I think that's the responsibility of a content creator. It's to look at interviews like this and dismantle them and say, do I as a consumer trust X is going to happen? What do I think happened when they did Y? Do I feel like they're going to replicate that situation and do that again? What does that mean for me as a person who enjoys this product? I mean, all of that sort of criticism is fine. So, you know, we'll play this again because I don't want to interrupt Flake for this comment, but I just feel like bad takes happen, good takes happen. As long as they're not rude bad takes, I'm not apologizing for them. I'll say, okay, cool, what have you got for me next? And we'll move on to the next thing that's good. And we'll talk about how much fun it is.
One of the things I just wanted to mention, just to close up that point, was that there's so much, there's a loud vocal. It's the internet. It's 2023. You're gonna hear everything coming back. One thing that LSS has done very well is admit when you're wrong. And one of the tough things that you'll never get coming back is you will get dunked on hard all the time. But when somebody makes an assessment of something and it's wrong, they're not on the hook for anything. They can walk away from it and will never get called.
Must be nice.
Also, content creators are on the hook. Like, if we say things that are wrong all the time, people just leave our channel, you know?
Must be nice. You're right. One of the things that you guys do is when you guys make a mistake, there's that screenshot of we made a mistake, the Dusk thing, right? That seems to be something that you guys hold fast to, and I'm going to take this opportunity to say, if you're listening to this out there and you've made a shitty take and you're wrong, just own it. It's not a big deal because they do. So should you. And they have so much more at stake than you and your 17 followers on Twitter. That's all I'm going to say.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Oh, no, dude, trust me. The last point I want to get to is Fab 2.0. You came on the Instant Speed podcast what seems like ages ago. We didn't have gray hair back then. We were about 10 pounds lighter. I was, you know, I was a younger, muscular man back then. Fab 2.0 was something that you kind of threw out there as a re-envisionment of what the game is, of how you want to approach it. Where are you with Fab 2.0? What is...
I mean, in my mind, it was an overwhelming success, and it's revitalized the game and taken away a lot of that early pressure to buy tons of boxes, which was starting to be sort of like a negative addiction loop where you'd buy tons of boxes and then you'd have these huge crashes and rushes, depending on what you opened, into more of a sort of steady, I can buy boxes, I can buy singles, you know, I can sometimes get something shiny, I can draft with it, and it's okay because we're not drafting unlimited. I mean, let's see what they say, but I think Fab 2.0 has been huge.
the next phase, and what kind of mistakes or things that you're beyond, that you've learned from?
So like the big one is ease of access to action points or go again on sips, which are start and play, stay and play, permanent. So particularly hero cards and weapons are the primary culprit of past.
Sip, start and play, stay and play. That's a good one.
You can call them mistakes or whatever, or maybe just design development.
I prefer to call them learnings. Like, this idea that a card game is going to come out of the gate and everything's going to be perfect is just absolute nonsense. We've been distorted by like digital card games because they can patch, and then their early cards that have been patched look perfect in retrospect. But board games don't come out of the gate perfect. Card games have to have rotation to get rid of the earlier mistakes. Like, it is learning. They're a team who are learning to make a card game for thousands of people, hundreds of thousands maybe.
Push too far. So example of that would be Luminaris. Start and
Rip. I love Luminaris.
play, stay and play weapon that just gives your whole team unbridled go again, or Briar with her ability to just keep creating the embodiment of lightnings, which is it's just very.
I mean, Briar had such strict conditions though. Sometimes she just couldn't do it. Yeah.
Low hanging, easy to access, action points through the embodiments, or even Starbow as an example. You reveal the full house and you get the go again for freebies. It's just the access to go again is just too free. And Voltaire is the most recent example, or it came into its own recently. Which is just the action points are too easy to access. They're too free. So the big transition from Fab version 1 to 2.0 is really just the action point economy, making players work a bit harder, invest more, like invest an actual card or some resources into generating action points or go again.
But one of the things that's interesting about that is that if we have to do that, then it becomes a lot easier to block people, right? And you're seeing that a bit with Dash.io, is that Fab 2.0 has hints of it's not about attacking every turn, it's about attacking on the right turn, because you don't want to use your resources on a turn that your opponent can just block. So maybe that is the future of Fab, and if it is, I'm actually here for it. The heroes that can just chuck down 16 damage on any turn that's going, like Katsu and Fi and things like that, do feel like they make the game less fun, because your basic choice is, am I blocking or am I taking damage? Whereas heroes that have to set up things that get damage through create these windows where you're strategizing for the future that do make it more interesting.
Are we beyond that? Because like you mentioned, a lot of those heroes now are retired. They're living legend.
Chain's another example as well. Yeah,
Chain, Starvo, a lot of that go again aspect and such that are, you said, easy to generate, reliable to achieve, but some of them still exist. Some of those heroes that are still on that power level, still kind of hovering about. What can we, once they have ascended, is some might say, well, it's just we take the power knob and dial it down a few notches, but it's the same game, it's the same experience. But is it, what's going to be Fab 3.0, let's say, or beyond the 2.0 once we're really nestled into this, and the culprits of Fab 1.0, 1.5 even are in the rear view?
Well, I think that we're very close to achieving that, actually. Like, in my view, Icelander is probably the one remaining hero who is in breach of our visions of Fab 2.0. Her hero ability is essentially giving you access to free action points.
I mean, every card that Fire has has got go again printed on it, but we'll continue.
Being able to play that card on your opponent's turn as though it were an instant, you're essentially getting an extra action point per turn cycle. So would you guys agree, is Icelander, in your view, the last
Dromai, dude.
The thing I see that's a little bit different about Dromai, though, is like your opponents actually have agency to interact with your ability to give your team go again, right?
Yeah.
Ooh, this seems like it might be a bit of an in-house argument where these guys see Dromai as a bit more pushed than James does. Okay, just hints of it.
the Phantasm. So Dromai is like
Brian is nodding, being like, yes, James. Yes, we've had this discussion before, but Dromai is busted and she needs to go.
kind of on that cusp where like you look at her ability and it's like it screams at you in the face of like that's a Fab 1.0, design.
I mean, she's everything. She's free resources. She's free go again. She's free. She restricts you in that you have to play reds, but outside of that, everything else she gives you is free, and that's a pretty big deal.
Profile, but I think and like there's some merit to that argument as well. But I would kind of like counterbalance that against the opponent has agency to break that up.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Like, I think you're.
It's interesting he says that because the turns where the opponent has the least agency are the turns when Dromai wins the game. Okay? The turns where Dromai plays, stacks the deck and then plays Chromai, Miragai, those big turns where they're playing multiple dragons, they're taking away your ability to remove their action points by using Miragai and Chromai, and then they're attacking you with the other dragons they have in play. The turns where your opponent has the least agency because you've set up the deck to create a lot of dragons in the one turn are the turns where Dromai wins the game. So just something to bear in mind where we talk about how much agency you have playing into Dromai is that actually one of the ways that Dromai wins the game is by playing in a way that removes the amount of agency their opponent has to stop their strategy.
You're exactly right. We're coming to the cusp of just a realized Fab 2.0. But I actually think the first Fab 3.0 hero already exists when you drill down into it. And I think it's Dash.io. I think Dash.io is saying it's not about heroes will never have access to, just multitudinous action points again. It's about you're going to have to work for it. You're going to have to do it in a different way. You're going to have to do it in a unique way. And I think Dash.io is such a successful hero on that axis of just getting back to that. You feel some of that chain power at moments, but you got to do the work. You have to set up your deck. You have to compromise your deck building to go ahead and get access to that.
This is entirely true, and I actually am really, really here for it. Dash.io is fantastically designed. I'm very excited for her. I just don't like not being able to block, and maybe that's because I played Oldhim and Guardian for too long. I don't like the idea that I'm going to draw a hand that doesn't block, and those are the 3 Dash games that I've played. They were going fine. I was stacking my deck, and still on the first cycle, I drew a hand of mostly items I couldn't block and on hit that I needed to block, and I kind of died. So, that payment to me sounds a bit steep, and we'll see if it pays off in the long run. But I do like what he's saying. I do like the fact that it's not just, I turn this dial up on my hero ability, aka chain, therefore I get go again. It's, I have an item on the top of my deck because I put it there, I use that item, I can get go again, but in response for getting go again, I don't get to keep that item the next turn, and I can't have limited attacks with my weapon anyway, so what am I doing with this go again? Dash.io feels like she is a lot of work and feels like she'll be a lot more fun with it. And what I will say is if we reach a point where heroes aren't playing every turn for massive attacks, so like if Fi goes and Katsu goes, and we're into this one turn on, one turn off sort of game style, Dash.io will be huge, because unless your opponent's exact one turn where they're smacking lines up with that one turn in the game where you can't play an item and you've got 3 items in your hand, then, she'll be golden.
And I think it's really, really exciting as an example of where we can go in the future to restore some of that Fab 1.0 feel in a much more sustainable, fair way.
I've always thought that there's there's the method of playing Fab where it's just like there's like the Bravo big bonk. I'm going to throw big attacks. I'm going to Rhinar you. I'm going to Levia you, etc. We're going to have some payoff. There's the go again, go wide, and we've had some very big time culprits of really exploiting that. But to me, there was another layer, which is the instant speed layer, the Kano level, but now the Dash.io level. And I feel like that is an extra layer that has risen the bar in terms of the same way that Kano has an incredibly high skill floor, it has an even higher skill ceiling. Dash.io feels like that's the way, that there are heroes that on the surface look rather gimmicky, but like you said, going 14-0 and falling just a shade short not too long ago, is instant speed. And I'm not saying this because this is the name of the podcast.
Instant speed, like, subscribe.
Yes.
right now, and tell your friend to as well. Instant speed. That's the next level.
James, I don't have any money, but that said,
you gotta get that plug in there.
Yeah, it's the best. But I feel like playing at instant speed has always been a matter of, well, the decision isn't clear cut. When you're playing a hero, I attack on my action phase. Now it's like, well, when's the right time to play an Art of War? A lot of players don't know how to just do that one card at the right time. And it's not just about, well, I'm going to do it when I...
The right time to play an Art of War is when your opponent is on 1 life in the finals of the World Championships, and you attack with a 3-power card, and they block with a 3-block card. That is the correct time to play Art of War. If any of you were considering playing Art of War at any other point, you wait until you're in the World Championship final, then you play it right then.
I pump this attack, I draw 2 cards. It's a very easy way, but at what phase? At what little margin? What little crack in the window do I sneak this through? What is instant speed something you guys are going to be exploring a lot more?
I mean, instant speed in Fab, because of the action economy, is the most potential to be broken of anything in the game. And that's what we saw with Prism, and Dash.io is having echoes of that in terms of how powerful her power turns are. So, they obviously have to be very careful with it.
Yep.
Yeah, they're obviously going to play with it. It's an aspect to play on the game. Like, we're still going to see permanence on the board being played with, like they are with Kasai, like Dromai had. We're going to see Ward and Ward 1 and stuff like that being used to create very powerful effects with very big limitations. One of the big things that I think someone, would have been good to ask about this interview is Fab's new attitude to permanence, because we've seen this change from Spectra, which is this is permanent until your opponent interacts with it, to Ward, which is very easy to destroy, to Crank, which is you get to decide, do you want this for 1 turn or 2 turns? And also there's this penalty of if you don't crank, you don't have an action point, because none of these things have go again. So we're seeing a much a big shift in the attitude to permanence, which kind of implies that in Fab 1.0 they didn't appreciate the power of permanent cards like Spectra, and now they've started to appreciate it more. But instance and permanence are 2 areas that will definitely keep exploring, because they're, Fab doesn't, for better or worse, it's a very cleanly designed game. It doesn't have a lot of axes to play on in terms of like attack, block, very straightforward. Arcane damage is the third one, I guess. And then you've got things like making attacks go over that and under that, and action points and instants, and letting people carry things over from turn to turn, with these kind of big things that impact the game.
Say it louder. Say it louder for those in the back.
I think it's an improving
part of the game.
Yeah, it's definitely like a core part of the game, and it's proven to be a very fruitful part of the game with something like Dash.io, and it will not be the last you see of that design space.
For sure. You even see it on particular Boston as well, and in appropriate places.
And also, let's not forget that Vincent has a combo that lets her generate multiple action points through, as well, by playing instants that become instant if you've dealt 1 damage and using Eloquence tokens. So, it's definitely an area where they want heroes that set up effects to be able to play instant effects to build, either, to build through power turns, right? It's how you break through someone who can block 12 a turn.
Yeah. And maybe one other thing just about action point economy. It's not that we don't want action points to be freely flowing at all in a game. They just need to be in the right places. So, for example, Ninja is the
Exactly.
class that intrinsically should be masters of go again, right? And that isn't going to change. You're not going to see that just change overnight. But it just there has to be.
There's just a very big difference between putting Go Again on 0 for 3 attacks, right, where you pay the cost, and something like Stavro where you get Go Again added as a bonus that lets you do something else. When really, if Stavro didn't say Go Again, he would be a lot more balanced. And it because with Stavro, it is the extra Frosty Hammer that caused all the problems. It's not just, it is the coming in for 11 with Dominate with Oak and Old, but the Frosty Hammer didn't was the nail in the coffin as well.
More ask of the player in the broader sense to generate go again and action points. But yeah.
Well, yeah, it's like the reason why Bravo players run Zealous Belting, it's a very conditional go again, and the card on it.
Yeah, but in Bravo, it's not conditional, right? Because it's something they have every time.
Zone really doesn't fit in any decks, but there it is. It's like, you want it?
Yeah.
This is what you're going to have to do.
Yeah.
It's a red 2-block, deal with it. And like you said, we've literally got about a minute or so left. I just want to thank you gentlemen again for your time, and just again for your candor in this, because there's a lot of people who always have questions, and they are always immensely grateful for how you approach, which are honestly difficult subjects, because it's very easy for you guys to just sweep it under the rug and move on to the next thing. There's a lot of other companies and stuff that do that. It's just, well, that's yesterday's news, but you guys want to learn from it, and you guys are very in touch with the community of what that is. And there's a very famous saying from another card developer, which is, you should always listen to the problems of the community, but be selective with the solutions they propose. And I think that that's important.
I mean, that's entirely true, right? Because most of the people have never made a card game in their life. They ultimately have a bias because they want their hero to be the best. So when they're selecting solutions, it's usually because the problem is that they're not good and their hero isn't good, and the solution they want is for their hero to be better. It's interesting because I resonate with that a lot, because I don't talk about every problem that I hear on my channel, right? Like, I don't talk about every bad judge interaction or every card that people complain about or every hero that someone complains to me about when they finish a game with them. You know, I'm quite selective in the things I actually bring to you, and I'm quite selective in how I bring them to people as well. Like, if you've watched any of my recent videos that talk about problems at World Championships, I'm not going on about specific people or talking about specific interactions, because there's not a learning from that, right? And there's not really a lot for a company like LSS to do with it. Like, if I just say, okay, this judge was bad, that judge just gets fired or whatever. But I don't think that that is the problem. I think there was, there have been institutional problems with some of the judging issues, right, that I've raised at the World Championships that need to be discussed. And the whole point about that way of approaching discussion is to build an environment where not all the feedback we give is the same level of validity. Not everyone who is talking has the same, entitlement to their opinion. Not every opinion is equally as valid. And I guess as part of a content creator's burden, I view it as my role to pre-screen and review and evaluate whether those opinions are valid. One of the reasons that we're watching this and we're reviewing it is that I think there are lots of interesting questions being asked, but one of the reasons I'm not jumping in every 5 seconds is that Flake is asking the majority of the questions I think people need to answer, and there's just some areas where I feel like the full answer isn't being given, or there are areas where I think they could expand on, or there's areas and analysis I think they're not going into that I think that the community probably would go into, such as it's not just Prism in Dusk to Dawn, it is Vincent and Bolton and Levia as well, none of whom have had a significant meta impact, and things like that. So, or discussing instant speed and instance and the action point economy, but not discussing the role of permanence and how that feeds into the action point economy, where both are kind of valid points.
Important, because not everybody, just because you're the loudest, that doesn't mean you're the most right. And
I disagree.
Well, clearly you're right. I can't yell louder than that until I edit that part out.
Yeah.
But, I would say to the community that, we are, like you say, very in touch with the voices out there and people's feelings and views and sentiment. And
we appreciate that.
We take that from a point of, like, people are expressing it because they're passionate and they care about the game. We want all of the fans to know that we deeply love and care about this game. We live and breathe it every single day, and we want it to be the best game that it possibly can. And we work incredibly hard, and we've got some really smart people on the product team to try and create the greatest game that the world has. So, just keep telling us what you're feeling. That's all good, but, be respectful, be polite, It does go a long way.
It does.
You can say what you feel in a polite way, and we will also acknowledge and respond to that.
But if you don't do it in a polite way, I will come for you.
I'm letting Brian loose on you.
Yeah.
Brian's absolute banshee on Twitter sometimes. Kind of gets he knows when James is sleeping, so he does comes nuts. Gentlemen, Chris Gehring, James White, and my #1 fan, Brian Gottlieb. Thank you for doing this, gentlemen. And anything else you want to sort of throw out there before we call it?
Bolton 3-0 in the feature match area this round, just so you know. So we went from 2-0 Tekla Boston and went to 3-0 to 3-0 Bolton.
Yeah, but the meta's stale, Brian. That's what they're saying.
Not after Worlds. I think there's exciting stuff going on in the room. I'm really, really pleased with what our players brought. It's going to be cool to see it unpacked.
I love it. Again, this is Flake coming in.
There you go. Bolton is going to be big in the next set. That's the Brian, or the next meta. That's the Brian Gottlieb prediction. We will see if that comes true.
Instant Speed Podcast live at the World Championships in Barcelona. So friends, don't forget, you're not losing if you're learning. See you next time on Instant Speed. Catch you later. Goodbye.
That was quite good. I clearly need a catchphrase like that. Usually I just say thanks everyone for chilling out, but that's kind of like, it's not glib enough. Maybe I need like a catchphrase. You're not losing if you're learning. That's pretty cool. That was a really good interview, and I really enjoyed it. And I thought that a lot of really good questions were answered. And obviously, not everything I thought was discussed in the detail that I would like, or not every question was answered in the way that I would like, which is why there's another 50 minutes added onto this interview. But, you know, I think this was a really cool discussion. I think it went to a lot of places. I would like to see a lot more interviews like this where people talk about the design of the game. I think a lot more attention could be paid to like how they're handling permanence and things like that, and, you know, how these things are happening. I also think I would just like to see a lot more discussion about, like, you know, the areas of the game. And I know that Fab has been hiring a lore team and creative writing team, so I'm really looking forward to this idea that we're going to get a lot more fleshed out in terms of the world of the game, because I think one of the things that will make or break a good TCG community in 2023 is how attached people feel to the world and the heroes and the game. It's one of my biggest worries about the Living Legend, is that if people start to get detached from their heroes as they retire, do they start to get detached from the world, or do they get caught in by something else? And I think that that's one of the biggest milestones, because I think one of the things that pushed a lot of people away from Magic when it happened was this degradation of the Magic story team, and moving from these blocks of sets where it was 3 blocks and a story and an overarching story into, you know, 1 block, 2 block, and then of course we have this whole Universes Beyond. Hey, it's not actually a Magic story anymore, it's actually Transformers and Lord of the Rings. Whereas I feel like one of the things that Flesh and Blood still has going for it is this world, and if it was done right, they could tie a lot of people into this world. Anyway, I'm Steelfur, this has been Steelfur Speaks. I'm kind of done speaking now, but I think this was a really great interview. So thanks for listening if you've made it this far. I hope I did this justice and sort of gave you more things to think about over and above the actual interview itself, because that is the whole point of reacting to this content.